Not all journeys begin with thunder. Some start in quiet moments beneath starry skies, where forgotten paths wait to be discovered. If you enjoy gentle quests and soft magic, like and subscribe for more bedtime stories. In the forgotten land of Veiltorin, where time draped itself in ancient moss and even whispers dare not cross the old stones, the village of Embers stood nestled among towering redwoods and mist-laced cliffs. Isolated and rustic, the village was little more than a cluster of moss-roofed huts and crooked paths twisted through centuries-old roots. But what made Embers more than a speck on the map were the torches. They burned day and night, never flickering, their flames blue instead of gold, a silent warning left by those long dead. Villagers spoke rarely of the past, but when they did, it was with lips trembling and eyes darting to the east, toward the forgotten ruined fields where the wind moaned with more than breath. It was here, among such quiet dread and ancient watchfires, that a boy named Caelan came of age. Caelan was no hero. At least that's what he told himself when he failed to lift his grandfather's forge hammer or when his feet ached too early on his patrol of the outer trails. He had always lived in his brother's shadow, Ririk, the warrior praised by the village elders, and the first to earn his mark as a fire-bound sentinel. But Ririk had vanished 3 seasons ago beyond the ridge of Skarn without a single ember left behind. Since then, Caelan had been haunted by a single notion, that Ririk wasn't dead, but bound by something darker than death. When the wind carried voices, Caelan listened. When the shadows stirred, he did not run. Something ancient was stirring, and he could feel it in his bones, a summoning not of his choosing. The story truly began on the eve of the Morfire Festival, a celebration born of survival, held every 50 years under the blood-red moon. This time, however, the moon refused to rise. Instead, a deep hum vibrated through the valley like a distant war horn, low and persistent. The blue torches turned violet, and one by one they began to flicker, a phenomenon not witnessed in 1,000 years. Elders gathered, whispering frantic spells of protection, while the children cried and the animals refused to drink from the rivers. That night, Caelan dreamed of a great eye opening in the sky, blinking once, then spilling molten stars across the land. He awoke before dawn to the screams. Rushing to the village square, Caelan found chaos. The shrine of the Flame Mother cracked, its sacred sigil broken in two, leaking blue smoke that curled into serpents. At its base, an unfamiliar figure stood, a woman cloaked in scales that shimmered like starlight. Her eyes, burning gold, met Caelan's with the gravity of fate. "You heard it too," she said, not asking but declaring. "You are marked." The elders demanded she be banished, but when she spoke in the old tongue, the very ground trembled. Her name was Saris, a whisperer from beyond the Blight Lands, and she had crossed the ruined plains not for war, but to find the last sigil-bearer. Caelan didn't believe her. Not at first. But when the sigil on the shrine reformed itself under his touch, melding into a new pattern no scholar could decipher, the village could no longer ignore the signs. Prophecy was a word no one used lightly. The Book of Flame, kept under the grand torch, had foretold the rise of the broken eye, the unsealing of the sigil, and the bearer who would awaken the ember-locked. These were myths to scare children, tales too ancient to be useful. But now, the book burned with pages unwritten, glyphs bleeding into the air. Saris claimed the sigil Caelan had reformed was the first of 7. And if they were not gathered before the eclipse in 3 moons' time, the eye would open again, this time fully. The journey was not a decision, it was a calling. Against the elder's wishes and the tearful pleas of his mother, Caelan left Embers at dawn. With him went Saris, silent and watching, and Bramble, his dog, a lean, one-eyed mutt with a nose for spirits. As they passed the ridge of Scarn, the sky turned pale and the trees whispered secrets. Saris explained the nature of the sigils, fragments of a covenant forged during the Great Sundering when the gods severed the world from the outer dark. Each sigil was hidden in a place of trial, where only the worthy could retrieve them. The first would be found in the Shardfen, a haunted marsh where light bent and time stuttered. Traveling toward the Shardfen meant crossing into lands long forsaken. Villages lay in ruin, their wells dry and fields salted by unnatural hands. Creatures of no name slithered between dying trees. In one such village, Ashmere, Kaelin discovered a wall of bones built into a shrine. At its center was a wooden mask, carved in the image of a silent face, no eyes, no mouth, just presence. When Kaelin touched it, he saw flashes, Ririk, chained in darkness, his eyes glowing blue like the ember fires, whispering, "Find the seventh before he does." When Kaelin told Saris, she grew grave. "The eye knows your blood now. It will not wait." The Shardfen stretched before them like a broken mirror, water reflecting sky in impossible angles. The air was thick with mist and strange music, notes too high for ears, but felt in the teeth. Navigation was madness. Trees moved when unobserved. Time lost meaning. Days passed, or perhaps hours, before they reached the heart of the fen. There, an ancient construct waited, part obelisk, part beast, carved with eyes and runes. To reach the sigil bound within it, Kaelin had to endure the trial of mirrors, facing reflections of himself twisted by fear, envy, and rage. One by one, he shattered them, until only the true Kaelin remained. When Kaelin placed his hand on the obelisk, the first sigil burned itself into his skin, spiraling around his forearm in a pattern of flame and vine. The pain was immense, not of flesh, but of memory. He saw glimpses of the world before the sundering, towers that pierced the stars, cities floating above oceans of mist, and the moment when the eye was chained by 7 gods wielding the sigils as keys. That power now slept inside him, 1/7 whole. But the moment the bond was sealed, the fen screamed. The eye had seen. Its herald, a creature of mist and fog, rose from the waters, a beast with no form, only hunger. The battle was chaos. Bramble was nearly swallowed, saved only by Saris's blood-ruined shield. The herald twisted air and ground, reshaping the battlefield with its will. But Kaelin, driven by instinct and something deeper, perhaps Rurik's voice echoing in his heart, used the sigil. Not to destroy, but to seal. Drawing from the mark, he carved a binding rune midair, and with Saris's chant, the herald was driven back into the deep. But victory was hollow. The sigil had awakened something older in Kaelin. He dreamed now in languages long dead, and fire followed his footsteps. They rested in the ruins of a watchtower, one of the last from the age of the Sentinel Kings. As Kaelin slept, Saris studied the sigil, muttering about convergence, fault lines and fate, and how Kaelin was not simply chosen, he was bait. She confessed she had lied. She was not the last whisperer. Others remained, but scattered, broken by the eye's corruption. Their plan had failed once. Kaelin was their last gamble. "You are more than one boy," she whispered, not expecting him to hear. "You are 7 echoes made flesh." He stirred but did not wake, dreaming of cities built on stars and a name he had never spoken, Aetherian. At dawn, they began the next leg of their journey. Their destination, the Cradle of Winds, high atop the Blaewind Peaks, where the second sigil lay guarded by storm and oath-bound spirits. The road ahead promised frost, betrayal, and memories not their own. As they disappeared into the morning mist, far behind them, in the broken shrine of Embers, the blue torches flared once more. From the ashes of the shrine, a figure rose, tall, cloaked in dusk, and bearing Ririk's blade. But his eyes were wrong, and he did not speak Kaelin's name. Only one word escaped his lips: return. The journey to the Blaewind Peaks was unlike anything Caelin had imagined. Beyond the haunted lowlands of the Shardfen, the terrain turned harsh and jagged, dominated by bone-white cliffs and valleys scoured by winds so fierce it howled like wolves in mourning. The land itself resisted passage. Paths once carved by caravans now lay buried in scree and frost. Saris walked in silence, her gaze distant, often pausing to consult fragments of a crystalline map that pulsed faintly in her palm. The Cradle of Winds, their next destination, was not a place found by foot alone. It had to permit passage. "You can't climb to it," she muttered. "You have to be called." Caelin felt no call, only the growing weight of his burning forearm and the way Bramble whined at night, tail tucked and ears flat, as if something just beyond the firelight whispered his name. They encountered their first true threat atop a ravine known as the Knife's Curve. The ground was littered with twisted bones, birds, beasts, and something disturbingly human-shaped. As they crossed, the wind ceased. Not lessened, but ceased, as if a great breath were being held. That's when the screech came, shrill, piercing, and wrong. The sky rippled. From it descended a creature of ice and thread, shaped like a moth but the size of a hunting cart. Its wings shimmered with runes, and its face, if it could be called that, was a mask of frost with a single burning needle for an eye. Saris shouted something in the old tongue and hurled a sigilstone. Caelin drew Ririk's dagger, though it felt useless against such horror. Bramble leapt, biting at its limbs. The battle was swift and brutal. Only when Caelin unleashed a sliver of his sigil's power, calling forth a flame that sang in harmony with the wind, did the creature dissolve, its threads unraveling into snow. After the battle, they found shelter in a crumbling chapel carved into the mountain. It bore the sigil of Erwin, god of winds and lost voices, long fallen. The air inside was still and heavy with the scent of iron and old incense. There they met the monk. His name was Thane, and he had waited over a century for a sign. "You bear the ember mark," he said to Caelin, his eyes milky but his voice firm. "And the wind bent to your will. The cradle has opened." Saris looked startled. "How do you know?" Thane smiled, showing teeth too perfect for his age. "Because I remember what the world was. I was born before the eye fell, and I've heard its voice every night since." He offered to guide them through the Whisper Spire, a mountain path that did not exist unless sung into being. The Whisper Spire was a marvel of forgotten craft, steps carved from wind-frozen thunder, spiraling around an invisible spine. Every footfall echoed not as sound, but as memory. Caelin heard himself as a child, laughing. Saris wept once, silently, but Caelin heard the name she whispered, Elian. Bramble barked, and the sound turned to music, chords strung through the air like harps. Thane sang in a language of no consonants, just breath and longing. The spire obeyed. Higher they climbed, through cloud and frost, until finally the wind ceased, not in warning, but in welcome. Before them stretched the Cradle of Winds, a hollow peak where storms were born, and in its center, a ring of floating stones spun slowly around a glowing relic. The second sigil was no simple thing to grasp. It pulsed with force, alive, wrapped in gales too strong for mortal approach. Saris explained that each sigil was bound to a trial. This one was forged by oath, an echo of loyalty and betrayal locked in the heart of the wind. Kalen would have to face the Warden of the Gale, a spirit forged from broken promises. "You must offer a truth you've never spoken," Saris warned, "and let the wind decide if it's worthy." As Kalen stepped into the ring, the world spun. He stood alone in a field of feathers, beneath a sunless sky. The Warden emerged as Ririk, his brother, identical in every feature save his eyes, which burned with cold fire. The Warden asked one question: "What did you wish when your brother vanished?" Kalen hesitated. Then, ashamed, he answered, "I wished he'd stayed gone, so I could become more than his shadow." The Warden did not speak again. Instead, it embraced Kalen, and the feathers turned to razors. Pain bloomed, not physical, but soul-deep. Kalen fell to his knees. In that moment of weakness, he accepted not only the truth, but the weight of it. His jealousy had been real. His love had never been absent, but it was complicated. When he rose, the wind did not fight him. The sigil unraveled from the air itself, binding around his other forearm. 2 marks. 2 truths. And the wind sang his name. Thane did not follow them beyond the cradle. "My part ends here," he said, retreating into the storm. But the storm never forgets. Saris seemed changed after the trial. She watched Kalen now with something like awe and sorrow. "2 more trials," she said, "and the sigil born within you will awaken. That's when he'll come." She never said who he was, but Kalen already knew. The Eye. The chained god beyond the stars, waiting with teeth made of moons and dreams of fire. "Where to next?" he asked. "The waking deep," she replied, "where the earth remembers what men have tried to bury." As they descended the peaks, they found signs of pursuit. Black feathers where none should be. Tracks that reversed themselves. And once, in a pool of frozen water, Kalen saw his reflection look away from him. Saris confirmed his fear. "He's sent a shadow. Not to kill you, but to confuse you. To delay you." They made camp near the Vale of Silver Pines, where silence itself was a predator. Kalen dreamt again. Ririk stood on a bridge of bones, sword drawn, his face half ash, half flame. "You're walking the edge," he said. "Don't let her use you." Kalen woke with the taste of ashes in his mouth and doubts kindling in his chest. They passed through the Moonless Pass, an ancient border of a forgotten kingdom. There they found remnants of war, statues shattered by time, banners turned to dust, and a throne made of roots. An old woman sat upon it. Her name was Edda, and she claimed to be the last heir of the Thornrot line. "You carry the ember. I carry its echo." She offered Kalen a gift, a blade made from dream steel, a material that could cut illusions and falsehoods. "You'll need it when you reach the 3rd sigil," she said. "The deep lies even to itself." Kalen thanked her, though he noticed her eyes were clouded not with age, but with memories she no longer possessed. They neared the waking deep as summer surrendered to frost. The earth changed. Trees grew twisted, reaching downward instead of up. The very soil pulsed. Saris grew quieter with each step, and Bramble whimpered constantly. "This place doesn't like truth," she said, "because the earth remembers what we've forgotten, and it wants us to forget it again." Kalen felt his sigils burn faintly, as if warning. And in the distance, something moved beneath the ground, vast and slow. It wasn't a creature. It was the land itself, breathing in its sleep. Before entering the deep, They performed a binding, a ritual to anchor memory and soul, in case the deep tried to erase them. Ceres cut her palm and pressed it to Kalen's, their blood mixing into a flame that hovered in the air. Bramble, too, was marked, on his forehead, a rune of returning. "If we forget who we are," Ceres said, "this fire will remind us." They stepped into the cavern at dawn, and all light vanished. The waking deep swallowed them without sound, and all that remained behind was a flickering trace of fire dancing above the rocks, whispering their names. Far away, in Ember Reach, the blue torches burned again, not with warning, but with welcome. A figure stood among them, cloaked in shadow, his eyes burning red. He held Ririk's sword, and his smile was not human. He whispered into the torchlight, and across the land, every shadow flinched. "He gathers the sigils," the figure hissed. "Let him. The more he binds, the more I awaken." The eye blinked, and the world, for the briefest moment, forgot how to breathe. There was no light in the waking deep, not even the echo of it. No torches could burn there, flames suffocated as if the very darkness drank them. Kalen held Ceres's hand tightly, her grip uncharacteristically cold. Even Bramble whimpered, his keen senses overwhelmed. The cave walls pulsed faintly, like veins in a sleeping beast. The air was thick, cloying with the scent of wet stone and forgotten rot. Each step echoed with memory, not their own, but fragments of pain and joy long since buried. Kalen heard a woman sobbing in a language he didn't understand, felt a sword pierce flesh in his back that was never his, and tasted the copper tang of betrayal. "This place is memory given flesh," Ceres said, her voice barely a whisper. "It remembers too much, and it hates forgetting." Time unraveled in the deep. Hours felt like days, or perhaps they were. Sleep became dangerous, each dream deeper than the last, each waking harder. Kalen began forgetting things, names, faces, even why they'd come. But the ember flame, the mark of their binding ritual, flared in moments of near loss. It kept their minds tethered to themselves. Ceres spoke of the deep's origin, once a vault of ancient truths, built by the dreamsmiths to store the memories of the gods. But when the eye fell from the sky, it cracked the vault. Now it fed on minds, growing smarter with every stolen thought. The third sigil, she claimed, was kept within the vault of echoes, buried at the lowest point, sealed by a forgotten name. As they descended, shadows grew more sentient. Shapes moved just out of reach, things that didn't walk but floated, their forms always just barely wrong. Kalen once saw what he thought was Ririk, standing in the dark, smiling. But when he ran toward him, he nearly plunged into a chasm. Ceres saved him, scolding him bitterly. "It will use your guilt. It will show you things that might have been. You must anchor to what is." But what was? Even Kalen felt himself slipping. The sigils on his arms burned constantly, but with them came memories he didn't own. Battles in deserts made of glass. A city in the belly of a beast. A kiss from someone who no longer existed. Were these past lives, or the dreams of the sigil-born? They reached the vault after a week, though the concept of time had lost all structure. The vault of echoes was not a door or a gate, but a mirror, hovering in the air, wrapped in chains of silence. Around it floated glyphs that resisted translation. In its surface, Kalen saw everything, his failures, his triumphs, futures unchosen, and lives unlived. He saw himself dying 1,000 ways, and living 1,000 more. To pass, Ceres said, he had to give up a memory he held most dear. The deep demands tribute, she whispered. Something true, something loved, and something lost. Kalen hesitated, then stepped forward. He gave the memory of his father's laugh. The cost was instant. Kalen no longer remembered the sound of it, only the shape, the motion, the empty space it left behind. But the mirror accepted the trade. Its chains broke, and the sigil appeared, coiled in mist, shaped like a spine of stars. As it branded Kalen's chest, visions poured into him. He saw the truth of the sigil-born. He had lived 7 lives, across cycles of world-ending and rebirth. Each time, he'd failed to stop the eye. Each time, he died before the final sigil was bound. And each time, something of him had survived, memories carried like seeds. This was the 8th life. And there would not be a 9th. But the deep would not let them go freely. As the sigil settled, the vault collapsed, and the deep awoke. The ground buckled. From the blackness rose the archivist, a being of thought and stone, its face a shifting mosaic of stolen memories. You have taken, it said in a voice like falling towers. Now you must return. Saris readied a glyph blade, but Kalen stepped forward. He held out his palm, the new sigil glowing. I remember enough, he said. But I don't belong to the deep. The archivist lunged. Kalen unleashed a torrent of light, not fire, but memory, rays of his own truth, his earned self. The archivist screamed, fragmented, and fell into the abyss, taking part of Kalen's name with it. They escaped through a collapsing tunnel, the deep collapsing behind them, as if trying to seal itself again. When they emerged into daylight, they were changed. Saris bore new scars along her back, glyphs not of her own making. Bramble limped, his paw half translucent for days. Kalen found himself unable to speak the name of his father at all. You paid the price, Saris said solemnly. But it wasn't enough. The eye knows now. It remembers you too. In the clouds above, a flicker of violet lightning split the sky, and the mountains trembled. Their next destination lay to the north, the sunken crown, once the capital of a kingdom drowned by time. But reaching it meant passing through the ash expanse, a scorched desert where nothing grew and the sky was always gray. It was said the ash expanse was where the gods first bled, when the heavens were torn in the war of sundering. The 4th sigil lies beneath the ashes, Saris explained. But the ashes burn. The trek was brutal. Their water spoiled. The air tasted of iron and regret. Kalen grew fevered. He began to forget his own face. Only Bramble's constant presence kept him grounded, and Saris's chants warded off the worst of the ash spirits. Along the edge of the expanse, they encountered a caravan, wanderers dressed in glass-veiled cloaks, riding beasts of bone and silk. They were the Cinder-Tide, scavengers of fallen realms. Their leader, a woman named Vera, recognized Kalen's sigils and bowed. You walk the thread unwoven, she said. There is an offering we can give. That night, under a false moon hung from kites, Vera performed the rite of recollection, a dance that called back forgotten names. Kalen regained a piece of his past, the scent of lavender on his brother's cloak, and the warmth of the fire they once shared. It was not much, but it was enough to stand. In the heart of the ash expanse, they found the ruin of Salakar, the temple of first flame. Once a beacon, now a grave. Inside, the ash rose like snow, and the 4th sigil pulsed beneath the altar, encased in a crystal of obsidian grief. This sigil's trial was unlike the others. No creature, no riddle, just a decision. Kalen could take it now, easily, but doing so would erase someone from history. One life must be unmade, Saris said grimly. The sigil demands it. A trade of presence. Kalen wept. He chose to erase himself from his mother's memory. She would no longer know he ever existed. The sigil burned brighter than the sun. With 4 sigils now bound, arm, chest, and palm, Kalen felt different. He could speak languages he'd never heard. He could call birds from the sky. He could hear the dreams of the dead. But with each gift came burden. He saw pain more sharply, sensed lies as screams, and could no longer sleep without firelight. Saris began to speak of the remaining 3 sigils with fear in her eyes. The next is in the realm of mirrors, she said, where you must face your ideal self and kill him. Kalen felt the weight settle again. He wondered how much of himself would remain by the end. In a distant place beyond the sky, the ice stirred. Chains forged from god blood trembled. The figure with Ririk's face watched a constellation blink out. 4, he said. He is further than any of his selves have reached. But he is still him. And that is weakness. Behind him stood a council of shadows, each bearing a broken crown. Shall we stop him? One asked. No, the figure replied. Let him reach the 5th. Then let him choose. That's when he will break. The eye blinked once, and all stars trembled. To reach the next sigil, Kalen and Saris ventured beyond maps and memory, to a place spoken of only in contradictions, the Mirror Realm. It was said to lie beneath reality's skin, accessible only through a breach in a still lake under a moonless sky. They found such a lake nestled in the hollow vale, a forest where leaves never fell and light moved backward. The lake was not water, but liquid reflection, mirroring not what stood above it, but what lay beneath, a city with towers of light and bridges made of song. The surface shimmered like a waking dream. Saris traced an ancient rune in the air, the word of entry, and the lake swallowed them whole. As they descended, Kalen felt his thoughts stretch and echo, like voices in a corridor with no end. They emerged in a city that defied logic, floating in a sky without stars. Streets curved like spirals, staircases led to doors in midair, and reflections walked free of their sources. This was Ethera, the shining fold, last remnant of the Mirror Lords, beings who once shaped truth through lies. Here, every citizen wore their own face twice, one smiling, the other weeping. The sigil they sought was known as the 5th mark, the ideal, bound not by blood or sacrifice, but by confrontation. To claim it, Kalen would have to enter the Chamber of Selves and defeat his ideal reflection, the version of him who had never failed, never feared, never lost Ririk. He will tempt you, Saris warned. He will not try to kill you. He'll try to replace you. Kalen spent a night in Ethera before facing the trial. Even resting was dangerous. Buildings whispered his secrets. Bramble barked at his own shadow. Saris meditated under a mirror arch, her eyes glassy with concern. Kalen walked the dream bazaars, where merchants sold moments and traded scars. He bought a thread of silence to steel his resolve. He saw illusions of Ririk in alleyways, always smiling, always walking away. One merchant offered to let him live his ideal life for a minute, a full 60 seconds where Ririk lived. Kalen never bore the sigils, and Embers never burned. Kalen refused. But a single tear escaped him, and it shimmered like silver. At dawn, or something like dawn, the Chamber of Selves opened. The hall inside was endless, walls lined with mirrors of all sizes and styles. Some showed Kalen older, others as a child. Some wore armor, some bore wings, some bled shadow. At the center stood his reflection, him, but taller, more confident, unscarred. His voice was calm, measured, reassuring. "You don't have to keep suffering," he said. "Let me bear the burden. I can do what you can't." Kalen felt the pull immediately, not magical, but emotional. His reflection offered perfection, a Kalen who had saved Ririk, who wielded the sigils without cost, who had never felt guilt. A Kalen unbroken. The duel began not with blades but with words. The reflection knew every weakness, every fear. "You resented Ririk," it said. "You pitied your mother. You longed to run from duty." Kalen denied none of it. He answered with his own truth. "I did, but I chose to stay. I chose to suffer." The chamber cracked. The reflection grew sharper. It drew a blade of light. Kalen drew the dream steel dagger gifted by Edda. Their blades clashed, sending arcs of thought and memory scattering through the mirrors. For every wound Kalen took, he bled regret. For every strike he landed, he lost a dream. It was a war not of strength, but of identity. When Kalen was nearly overcome, he remembered something Saris had said long ago. "Truth is not purity. It's persistence." Kalen stopped fighting. He dropped his blade. The reflection paused. "Why yield?" it asked. "Because I'm not perfect," Kalen replied. "And I don't need to be." With that, he embraced the reflection. The light within it shattered. It collapsed into him, not defeated, but accepted. The fifth sigil burned across his back in the shape of twin wings made of mirror shards. It did not hurt. It healed. Kalen screamed, not in pain, but in catharsis. The chamber dissolved, and he awoke in Saris's arms. Outside the chamber, the city had changed. Ithera shimmered brighter. Citizens shed their double faces and wept. A parade of light marched through the sky. "You pass," Saris said softly. "Not by conquering, but by becoming." The mirror realm, satisfied, began to collapse. "It was never meant to last," Saris explained. "It was built to hold broken truths. But you've made them whole." As they fled the dissolving city, the sky fractured into 1,000 pieces, each one a memory released. One shard fell into Kalen's hand. Inside it, he saw Ririk, alive, smiling, watching a fire. It was a possible future. He held it until it faded. Returning to the waking world was violent. The mirror realm resisted their departure. Kalen and Saris emerged in the ruins of a forgotten observatory, shaken and gasping. Days had passed. Bramble, who had waited faithfully, greeted them with a howl of joy. But something followed them, something else. A presence that hadn't existed before. Saris sensed it instantly. "He's watching more closely now," she said. "He cannot see you directly, but his heralds move." That night, a storm unlike any other swept across the land, black rain, and winds that whispered Kalen's name in dozens of voices. They sought refuge in an ancient way station, once used by skyfarers who traveled between floating cities before the eyes fall. There, Kalen met an old man who recognized the fifth sigil. "You've come further than most," he said. "But the sixth will test not your will, but your loyalty." The sixth sigil, he claimed, was hidden in the Isle of Regret, accessible only through the Sea of Still Blood, where time looped and choices repeated. "You will meet those you left behind," he warned. "And you will have to leave them again." Kalen's stomach churned. He didn't ask if Ririk would be there. He already knew. The sea of still blood was calm as glass. They traveled in a boat of woven reeds and silver thread, gifted by the Skyfarer. Saris grew quiet, her eyes haunted. Kaelin dreamed more frequently now, and sometimes while awake. The boat crossed scenes from his past, Emberreach, the Shardfen, even the waking deep, playing like memories staged on distant shores. At one point, they'd passed a version of Kaelin and Ririk training in a sunlit field. Kaelin reached out, but Saris stopped him. They're not ghosts. They're choices. Unmade, but not forgotten. Kaelin withdrew, but he kept looking back. The Isle of Regret loomed at last, a crescent of black sand and white trees that bled when touched. The sixth sigil awaited atop the island's single hill, embedded in a statue of Kaelin himself, older, weary, smiling sadly. But before he could approach, figures emerged from the trees. Ririk, his mother, the elders of Emberreach, even Thane, the mountain monk. Each asked a question. Each begged him to return home, to choose peace, to abandon the burden. One by one, he turned away. But when Ririk stepped forward, arms open, Kaelin faltered. His brother wept. I died to save you, he said. Why won't you let that be enough? Kaelin broke. He fell to his knees, crying harder than he ever had. Because you're worth more than a grave, he said. Because I'm still here. Because something of you is still with me. He walked past Ririk, past the statue, and touched the sixth sigil. It sank into him like light into glass. The voices vanished. The statue cracked. The island began to dissolve, the sea roaring in fury. Saris pulled him into the boat just in time. As they sailed away, the island sank, its trees weeping crimson. Kaelin looked back only once. Ririk stood on the shore, smiling. And this time, Kaelin smiled back. Kaelin awoke from a dreamless sleep to the sound of bramble whining. The sea had vanished. No waves, no boat, no shoreline. Only a stretch of gray stone leading into a crimson mist. Saris stood a few paces ahead, arms folded, staring at the sky. Except there was no sky. Just endless red above, pulsing like a wound. We're not in the world anymore, she said, her voice heavy. We've crossed into the Emberwake. The Emberwake wasn't a place found on maps. It was a consequence, a space between life and judgment, formed when 6 sigils had been bound. Here, the 7th sigil would reveal itself, but only to one who could confront the source of the chain, and speak the true name of fire. Kaelin shivered despite the heat. The final test had begun. They walked in silence through the ash-slicked plains. The ground cracked like burnt glass, glowing with the embers of ages past. Occasionally, Kaelin saw ghostly shapes in the distance, armored warriors locked in eternal duels, figures cradling their own shadows, a child endlessly chasing a bird of flame. This place remembers the cost of every choice, Saris said. It is memory given form, again. Kaelin clenched his fists. He was tired of memory, tired of being watched by the past, tired of bearing guilt that felt older than the sky. But the sigils on his body pulsed in response, each one whispering in a different tongue, as if guiding him towards something only they could see. The 7th sigil was close. He could feel it. They reached the Heartforge, a colossal anvil set in the center of a chasm that breathed fire. Upon it rested a sword, jagged and red-hot, forged from 1,000 broken blades. Above it floated a single burning glyph, the 7th sigil, shaped like a phoenix devouring its own wings. To claim it, Saris said, you must forge your pact. Kaelin didn't understand. Saris explained that the final sigil was not bound by battle or blood, it was bound by purpose. Every sigilborn must choose, she said. Not what to fight for, but why to fight. Without that, the power will devour you. You'll burn before you ever touch the eye. Kaelin approached the forge. The heat stripped away thought. It demanded truth. No mask. No echo. Only flame. The forge summoned images from Kaelin's soul. Ririk stood before him, alive, blade drawn, asking, Would you die for me? Then Saris, weeping, whispering, Would you betray me to save the world? His mother's face followed, then Thane, then Vera, each a test, each a pull. Finally Kaelin saw himself, not as he was, but as he might become. A king of ashes, adored and feared, wielding the sigils to bend reality itself. Why do you fight? The vision asked. Kaelin shook. He had no easy answer. But then he remembered every face he had left behind. Every pain. Every step. Because I was chosen to fail, he said. And I choose not to. The anvil blazed. The sword shattered. The seventh sigil flew into Kaelin's chest, and ignited. The fire didn't burn. It unmade. Kaelin screamed as the sigils merged, forming a great ring of flame across his back and chest. His thoughts fragmented, reformed, fragmented again. He remembered lives he hadn't lived, 7 of them, each ending with the eyes awakening. He saw the first sigilborn, a woman of stars. He saw her fall. He saw the 5th, a boy no older than Bramble, consumed by the same forge. And he saw the 6th, Ririk. Kaelin fell to his knees. He was chosen before me, he whispered. He bore the first 6, but he refused the last. Saris placed a hand on his shoulder. That's why he vanished. Not dead, just broken. The truth hit Kaelin like a blade. Ririk had been the previous bearer, and failed. The Emberwake shook. A crack split the horizon. From it rose a storm of black flame. At its heart floated the figure that had haunted Kaelin's visions, Ririk, or what remained of him. Cloaked in void, wielding a blade of melted time, his eyes burned not with memory, but with absence. He spoke a single word. Brother. The ground beneath Kaelin exploded, and suddenly they were face to face, twin halves of a ruined star. You think you can finish what I could not? Ririk hissed. You think purpose is enough? I had purpose. And look what it made me. Kaelin raised his hand. The sigils flared. The final battle had begun, not with the eye, but with its most tragic herald. The duel was cataclysmic. Each strike shattered pieces of the Emberwake. Ririk fought like a force of nature, his attacks echoing with guilt and rage. Kaelin answered not with fury, but with hope. He wielded not just power, but remembrance. Every sigil acted in harmony. Fire to block, wind to move, water to heal, light to blind, shadow to deceive, time to adapt, and flame to anchor. Ririk weakened, but refused to fall. If I die, he said, the eye is free. Kaelin understood. The sigils were keys, but also locks. Ririk had become a vessel, a prison. Killing him would unleash the eye completely. Kaelin hesitated, and that pause nearly cost him his life. A blade pierced Kaelin's side. Darkness crept in. But in that moment, Saris intervened. She hurled her last sigilstone, a fragment of herself, into the breach. It struck Ririk's blade, splitting it in two. She fell afterward, her body crumbling to light. Ririk staggered. The void flickered in his eyes. Kalen took his brother's hand. "We don't have to end like this," he whispered. "You were never the failure. You were the first." Ririk blinked. The void began to crack. "I remember," he said. "The oath. The stars." He fell into Kalen's arms. The black fire fled, screeching. The emberwake calmed. The pact was made, not in battle, but in forgiveness. With Ririk unconscious, the forge shattered, and the emberwake began to collapse. Kalen, now the complete Sigilborn, opened a gate with his voice alone. They emerged into the world once more, near the ruins of Emberreach. Only ashes remained, but the blue torches burned again, brighter than ever. Bramble emerged from the gate last, carrying Ceres's pendant in his mouth. Kalen wept. She was gone, but her sacrifice had saved them both. The sky above shimmered with unnatural light. "It knows," Kalen said. "The eye knows we're coming." Ririk stirred. "Then let it fear," he rasped. The world had changed in their absence. The eye had begun to influence the living. Cities no longer slept. Dreams bled into waking. Stars vanished from maps. Entire rivers flowed backward. The Council of Echoes, once guardians of balance, had fallen to madness. Kalen and Ririk were not greeted as heroes, but as harbingers. People feared the sigils, feared what Kalen had become. But a few still believed. The cinder tide returned, bearing flame offerings. The last whispers revealed themselves. Even the sea spirits of still blood pledged fealty. A host began to gather, not to worship, but to follow. Kalen stood atop the last tower of Emberreach. He looked out at the broken world. "There's only one place left," he said. "Where the eye waits." Ririk nodded. "The vault beyond stars. The breach in the firmament." Kalen traced the seventh sigil on his chest. "That's where we unmake it. Not bind. Not seal. End." Ririk smiled faintly. "Then we'll need more than flame. We'll need truth." They turned toward the east, toward the sky that bled violet. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, they would walk it together. In a place beyond thought, the eye opened fully. Its chains were nearly gone. It saw Kalen and Ririk. It remembered Ceres. It remembered every bearer, every failure, every war. And it feared. For the first time in its eternal existence, the eye saw a flame that would not be consumed. It screamed, but no sound came. Only shadow. Only silence. Only the end approaching. The world had fractured. Mountains bled smoke. Forests whispered the names of the dead. And in the skies a second sun had appeared, cold, pale, and watching. Kalen and Ririk traveled east with a small band of followers, whisperers, cinder-tide, and dream-walkers once imprisoned by the council. The path to the vault beyond stars lay through the hollow expanse, a realm untouched by time, where stars fell like snow and gravity folded in on itself. "Here," Ririk said, "the eye first entered. It was not created in their world, nor summoned. It had fallen, bleeding thought into stone, and the sigils were mankind's desperate attempt to lock it away. But the vault was weakening. It called to them, louder each night. They crossed the river with no mouth, where water flowed soundlessly and reflections showed futures that never came to pass. Kalen saw himself kneeling before a throne of bone, weeping. Ririk saw his younger self, untouched by ruin. The vault feeds on regret, Saran, a whisperer, explained. It makes you hesitate. That is its shield. Kalen forced himself not to look again. Each step became heavier. Saran gifted them relics of silence, stones that dulled thought, keeping dreams from leaking into the waking world. Still, Kalen could feel the eye in his bones. It did not sleep. It waited. They reached the scarp of unknowing, a cliff carved not by nature, but by something that had never wanted to understand. The sky here was black ink, dotted with crimson stars that pulsed like wounds. Below, the vault shimmered, a spiraling crater of crystal and shadow, ringed by towers that rotated without wind. We go down, Kalen said. We end this. But the path into the vault was a paradox. Time slipped. Words bent. The whisperers fell silent, their voices taken. Ririk was the first to bleed from the ears. We're not meant to exist here, he gasped. Kalen touched the seventh sigil, and it flared. For a moment, the world realigned. The vault noticed. They descended in silence. The first guardian came at the sixth spiral, an echo of Kalen himself, forged of glass and screams. It wielded his doubts like blades, every swing a memory twisted, Saris blaming him, Bramble dying, Ririk calling him a mistake. Kalen could not fight it. But Ririk could. He is not this, Ririk shouted, striking the echo with a blade of true flame. He is more. With each strike, a memory healed. The echo collapsed into ash. Kalen fell to his knees. Why do they keep showing me? He asked. Ririk helped him up. Because the eye fears you. At the ninth spiral, the second guardian emerged, this time, Ririk's echo. But this one did not fight. It begged. Let me rest, it whispered. We've done enough. Let the world break. It showed Kalen visions of peace, a quiet farm, no sigils, no eye. Ririk weeping beside a lake, free of his burden. We could end it all, the echo said. Just let go. Kalen was tempted. But then he remembered Saris's face, burning, defiant. He remembered the forge, the fire that unmade him. We're not here for peace, Kalen whispered. We're here for truth. He drove his blade through the echo's chest. It smiled as it vanished. The final spiral awaited. The vault pulsed, revealing its heart, a floating cube of obsidian and light, spinning in every direction at once. It was not large, barely the size of a wagon, but it radiated infinity. The eye had no face, no voice. It did not speak. It simply was. But as Kalen and Ririk approached, their sigils ignited. The seventh flared into wings of flame. The vault responded. The cube cracked. A beam of thought lashed out, knocking Ririk backward. Kalen alone stood before the eye. And then it opened. There was no light. No sound. Just knowing. Kalen was everywhere. He saw every bearer before him, each life, each death. He saw the first lock, the breaking, the war. He saw how the eye had fallen into their world, not as a punishment, but as a test. You wanted us to seal you, Kalen said. You needed us to define you. You're not a god. You're a question. The eye pulsed. It agreed. And now Kalen understood. The sigils had not been gifts. They were arguments. Symbols humans had created to declare what should and should not exist. And the seventh choice was the most powerful of all. Kalen reached into the vault. Not with his hand, but with his will. The eye recoiled. It showed him everything he feared: Saris blaming him, Ririk dying again, the world burning because he dared to decide. But Kalen held steady. "You asked what truth I bring," he said. "Here it is. You are not our master. You are our mirror, and I refuse your shape." The seventh sigil exploded into a storm of light. It rewrote the vault's laws. Time fractured. Memory unraveled. Kalen saw his past dissolve, and a new one form. The eye screamed, but it was not pain. It was release. Ririk reached him as the vault collapsed. "Did you bind it?" he asked. Kalen shook his head. "I named it. That was all it wanted." Behind them, the cube faded. The light dimmed. The vault became quiet. No echoes. No guardians. Just silence. Ririk laughed. "You argued a god into peace." Kalen didn't laugh. "No. I argued myself." He turned. The others waited, those who had followed, those who still believed. The sigils faded from his skin. The war was over. But the world remained broken. Kalen knew what came next. They emerged into a changed world. The second sun vanished. The real one returned, warm, not watchful. The rivers flowed true. The stars returned. People remembered sleep. But scars lingered. The council's remnants still plotted. Lands scarred by war would take generations to heal. Kalen walked with Ririk and Bramble toward the new dawn. "What now?" Ririk asked. "We teach them what we learned," Kalen said. "How to fight without swords. How to change without chains." Ririk smirked. "You sound like a philosopher." Kalen smiled. "No. Just a man who finally understood the fire." Months passed. The sigil-born name became myth again. Kalen refused thrones. Ririk vanished into the eastern wilds, seeking forgotten truths. Bramble grew old. The world began again. But every so often, someone would find a stone etched with a symbol, not of fire, or shadow, or light, but of choice. And they would feel something stir. The sigils had faded, but their meaning remained. In every act of courage, every refusal to hate, every voice that said no to power, the eye was gone. But its question would remain, forever. And beneath the world, where old things rest, something stirred. Not the eye. Not a god. Just a spark. A question answered too soon. It waited, not in hunger, but in curiosity. After all, if Kalen had unmade one truth, why not more? Seasons passed since the eye was sealed. The lands began to mend, but peace wore a thin mask. Kalen wandered westward, away from thrones and praises. He had refused to become a symbol, but symbols, like truths, were often stolen. Villages whispered of the sigil-bearer, walking among them. Some called him prophet. Others curse. In the north, warlords carved new dominions in the name of long-dead gods. In the south, cities formed cults around shattered relics. Kalen knew the peace was hollow. The eye had been silenced, but its echoes still wandered. And somewhere deep in the roots of the world, something darker began to stir. In the crumbling library city of Varkesh, Kalen met an old enemy, High Archivist Malrath, once a voice of the council. Malrath now wore chains of parchment, inked with lost sigils. "The eye was never the only flame," he said. "There was one before it. Kalen should have killed him." But something in Malrith's eyes, madness touched by clarity, gave him pause. Before? Kaelin asked. Malrith nodded. The first flame. The one the stars feared. The eye was its reflection. He handed Kaelin a fragment of obsidian etched with a spiral, deeper than stone. It's waking, Malrith whispered. And it's hungry. Kaelin followed the signs. Fires that burned without fuel. Storms that reversed time. Children born with voices of ash. All paths led to the Shadow Deep, a continent erased from maps, where even memory frayed. He called upon Ririk, who returned from the eastern wilds carrying dreams wrapped in runes. Bramble joined them too, her body frail, but her magic sharpened by time. Together they journeyed into the Forgotten Lands. We're not fighting the Eye again, Kaelin told them. This is older. Wilder. It doesn't ask questions. It consumes them. The Shadow Deep welcomed them with silence. Mountains wept salt. Trees grew in reverse. Rivers bled upward into the clouds. Kaelin's sigils burned again, not with power, but with warning. They were not welcome here. At the center of this realm stood a great rift, a canyon lined with obsidian teeth, pulsing with flame. That's where it sleeps, Bramble murmured. The first flame. The ground trembled when she spoke its name. Ririk narrowed his eyes. It's not a god. Kaelin nodded. No. It's what gods run from. Within the canyon, time collapsed. They fell through centuries in seconds. Civilizations rose and died in stone murals that changed every hour. Whispers grew louder, voices speaking in tongues that hadn't existed yet. Kaelin saw children made of smoke, ancient towers made from dragon bones, and a throne of glass atop a dying sun. Bramble began to forget her own name. Ririk bled sand from his eyes. Kaelin clung to the seventh sigil, choice. It anchored him. We're close, he said. It's watching us dream. They reached the crucible, a chamber forged in the world's first heartbeat. At its center, suspended by chains of lightning, was a flame, black yet blazing. It burned without consuming. It remembered. As they approached, the flame whispered, not in words but in truths. It showed Kaelin the origin of magic, how the first flame had been split into sparks, bound into runes, cast into stars. The eye was only a fraction, a failsafe. It's incomplete, Bramble said. It's looking for its missing self. Ririk stepped forward. And what happens when it finds it? The flame lashed out. Kaelin was flung into a memory, not his, but the world's. He saw the first fire born, made from light and bone. He saw them fall, burned away by their own arrogance. He saw the council, digging into the dark, thinking they could harness echoes. And he saw the sigils born, not from power, but from fear. Mankind's need to control what could not be named. You made cages, the flame thundered. You broke truth into symbols. You think you understand? Kaelin cried out. We were trying to survive. The flame paused. Then burn with us. Kaelin awoke to screams. Bramble's skin glowed, her magic unraveling into runes that floated from her flesh. Ririk stood, barely alive, holding the seventh sigil like a shield. The flame now stood taller than towers, its form shifting with each breath, child, storm, sword, star. It was no longer bound. Run! Kaelin shouted. But Bramble held her ground. No, she said. It's not hate. It's hunger. It wants its name. She stepped forward, hands outstretched, offering her life. The flame hesitated. Then, softly, it consumed her. Not in pain, in understanding. Where brambles stood now hovered a shape, a symbol of balance. The flame calmed. It whispered one word, "Remember." And then it vanished, collapsing into a single ember. Kaelin picked it up. It burned, but it did not hurt. Ririk knelt beside him. "She gave it what it lacked," he whispered. "A limit." Kaelin nodded. "And a name." He stared into the ember. "This is not a weapon. It's a seed." But seeds, like truths, could grow into monsters or miracles. And somewhere, someone else had felt the flame awaken. They returned from the shattered deep changed. The ember was sealed in a vessel of starlight and hidden beneath the roots of the world. Kaelin refused to use it. Not unless the world forgot again. But others had seen what they did. New powers rose, claiming to be heirs of the flame. In distant lands, flames burned in temples not built by hands. Kaelin sent warnings. Some listened. Most did not. Ririk left once more, hunting these false flames. Kaelin stayed behind, guarding the vessel, watching the skies. Years passed. Myths changed. Bramble's name became legend. But Kaelin did not age. The seventh sigil still lived in him, anchoring his soul to the world's weave. He became a quiet guardian, wandering, teaching, telling stories of fire, not to scare, but to remind. He spoke of balance, of limits, of choice. And always, he warned, magic has a memory, and fire never forgets its shape. In secret, the ember pulsed, waiting, not with hunger, but hope. And deep in the void beyond stars, something stirred. Not a flame, not the eye, but a shadow of both. A mirror never shattered, a truth never told. It saw the ember and smiled. "Now," it whispered, "now the game begins again." Kaelin stood at the summit of Mount Dareth, where the winds whispered like broken oaths. Below, kingdoms churned in their ambitions, banners raised, thrones claimed, temples built atop forgotten bones. Yet none of them knew what had truly been born in the Shatterdeep. The ember remained hidden, but its warmth reached beyond stone and soil, igniting belief in places Kaelin could not silence. Prophets emerged in the east, their eyes burned amber with a fire they could not control. In the ruins of Carvalon, a new order declared the coming of the Emberborn. Kaelin watched from afar, unease tightening his chest. Truth, like fire, was being kindled into lies. Ririk returned bloodied and tired, his left eye blind and bandaged. "3 cults have merged," he told Kaelin. "They wear your symbol. They chant Bramble's name." Kaelin's hands curled into fists. "She gave her life to bring peace, not power." Ririk tossed down a blackened medallion etched with the sigil of the 7th rune, choice. "They don't care," he said. "They've crowned a hollow king. Some child they call the Flame's vessel. He has no will of his own, just fire in his veins. And they feed it." Kaelin turned toward the horizon. "Where?" Ririk answered with one word. "Eldrith." Eldrith had once been a kingdom of scholars and weavers. Now it was a fortress of ash. Its spires bled heat, and its streets were lined with flamewalkers, priests who bore burns in reverence. At the center of it all stood a boy no older than 10, seated on a throne made of molten glass. His eyes burned with the same black-orange hue Kaelin had seen in the crucible. "They've bound a spark," Ririk muttered. "That child is the ember. Kalen's heart twisted. They've made him a prison. Ririk looked to Kalen. Can you set him free? Kalen's reply was quiet. Only if he wants to be. They entered Eldrith in disguise, cloaked in soot and silence. Ririk posed as a broken scribe, while Kalen let his sigils fade into dormancy. Inside the city, chants echoed like heartbeat. Ash to truth, flame to flesh. Children were taught to burn paper memories as offerings. In the temple, Kalen saw murals of himself, depicted with Bramble at his side, casting down gods, holding aloft the ember like a sun. It was grotesque, false, but powerful. Lies often are. In the throne room, the Hollow King looked at Kalen and whispered, "You're in my dreams." The boy's voice was ancient, worn, not his own. "They feed me truths I didn't ask for," he said. "I remember a girl of roots, a man of smoke, and the silence between stars." Kalen approached slowly. "That was Bramble, and Ririk, and the Crucible." The boy's hands shook. "They say I'm the seed." Kalen knelt. "You're not. You're the soil. And you don't have to carry this alone." Behind them, the high priest stirred. Ririk gripped his blade. "They'll kill us," he whispered. Kalen nodded. "Then let's burn the lie." The rebellion began with silence. Kalen placed his hand on the boy's chest, and the ember inside paused. The flames dimmed. The Hollow King looked up, blinking. His voice, now his own, said, "I don't want to burn." Kalen smiled sadly. "Then let's teach them something new." Chaos followed. The priest screamed. Ririk held the line, blade moving like memory through flesh. Kalen lifted the child, who now wept soot. The throne cracked. The glass melted. Eldrith trembled as the ember withdrew. Not vanished, but hidden, returning to sleep. They fled into the wastes, the Hollow King, whose true name was Elian, wrapped in silence. Ririk staggered from his wounds. Kalen walked behind them, carrying the weight of choices made and truths broken. They found shelter in a forgotten watchtower built before even the eye. There, Kalen taught Elian how to breathe without flame, how to speak without prophecy, how to be. But Elian still dreamed of fire, of a great mirror in the void, watching, waiting. Kalen knew the ember had awakened more than memory. It had stirred its reflection. Far in the north, where ice drank light and time slept in glaciers, a different kind of fire burned. A mirror blade, a being born of void and echo, rose from beneath the frost. It bore no face, but many voices. It whispered to the forgotten, offering warmth that hollowed instead of healed. The mirror flame, they called it. Where Kalen's ember gave light to choose, the mirror flame gave light to obey. Already it moved southward, leaving behind frost fire cults and empty-eyed seers. Kalen felt it in his bones. "It's begun," he told Ririk. The ember drew it close. They could not run. Kalen knew that. The sigil stirred once more, no longer dormant but vigilant. Elian, still fragile, had begun etching dreams into stone, drawings of two flames entwined in war, of Bramble weeping through stars, of Kalen burning with wings. Ririk warned of new cults forming along the coasts, all calling to the mirror flame. "We're outnumbered," he said. "Outmatched," Kalen simply replied. "Then we'll give them something they can't match." He placed his palm to the stone. Truth. A council was summoned, not of kings, but of the broken. Ririk gathered old allies, wounded mages, scarred scholars, whisper folk and bone singers. Not armies, just remnants. Kalen stood before them and said, "You don't need to follow me. You don't even need to believe. But if you remember the world before the eye, before fire was turned into a throne, then stand with me. Not for war, for wakefulness." One by one they stood, not in hope, in refusal to sleep again. Elian stood beside Kalen, his eyes dimmer now, gentler. "What if I lose control again?" he asked. Kalen smiled. "Then we catch you. And if I fall?" Elian said. Kalen's gaze turned hard. "Then you stand." The Hollow King was no longer hollow. Not a vessel. Not a god. Just a boy who chose. And that, Kalen knew, made him more dangerous than any flame. For choice was the one thing neither the eye nor its shadow could command. And war was coming. In the sky above the northern horizon, the stars began to blink. Not fade, blink. As if something vast moved between them. A shape. A flame that did not burn. The mirror flame had seen Kalen's truth. And it would answer. Not with fire, but with a crown. Night came like a wound across the sky, and in its hollow, the mirror flame stirred. It was no longer a whisper. It had grown teeth, a shape, a rhythm. Entire valleys turned silent beneath its gaze. Snow fell like ashes, and the stars above twisted ever so slightly, like eyes watching through frost-laced glass. Kalen felt it before he saw it, like breath drawn from the lungs of the world. He stood atop the old watchtower where Elian sketched dreams into stone and whispered, "It's near." Ririk nodded beside him, eyes sharpened with dread. "And it's no longer hiding." They rode through the dusk with a caravan of remnants, those too scarred to fear and too tired to lie. Bone singers carried staffs carved with mourning hymns. Whisper folk hummed lullabies to keep madness at bay. At the caravan's center rode Elian, wrapped not in royalty, but in wool and thought. The child who had once been a vessel now carried a journal full of dreams, prophecies not dictated, but chosen. "We make our own story now," he told the listening girl beside him. She smiled and replied, "Then let's make it end better than the last one." In the mountain pass of Aratha's Maw, they met the storm. It came without thunder, without wind, just cold and silence. Trees wept frost. Animals lay still, eyes open. And above them, floating in the air like a broken reflection, came the herald of the mirror flame. It had no mouth, yet its voice echoed through stone and soul. "He bears fire. Give him!" Elian clutched his chest. Kalen stepped forward, sigils glowing along his arms. "He is no longer yours to claim." The herald unfurled its shape. A jagged mirror turned inside out, and descended. Battle in Aratha's Maw was unlike any Kalen had known. The herald did not strike with blade or spell, but with memory. It cast shards of forgotten moments, Kalen's failures, Bramble's death, Ririk's betrayal of kin. Each shard cut deeper than steel. The remnants faltered, weeping without knowing why. But Kalen stood firm. "I chose those memories," he roared, slamming his sigil-etched staff into the ground. A pulse of golden fire rippled outward, not burning, but binding. The mirror cracked. The herald screamed, not from pain, but from being refused. They buried their dead beneath frost-laden stones, songs sung not for glory, but remembrance. Ririk wept openly for the first time since Bramble's fall. "We can't win this, Kalen," he said. "Not like this." Kalen placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Then we don't win it. We survive it. Long enough to turn the tide. Elian stood apart, staring at the horizon. It's heading south, he said. To the sigil cradle. If it reaches the ancient runes, it will rewrite them. Kalen's breath caught. Then we reach them first. The sigil cradle was a place of myths and contradictions. No map showed it, but every bard sang of it. Some said it floated in the sky. Others said it lay beneath the ocean's spine. The truth was more complicated. It existed between, in the folds of choices never made. To reach it, they needed to undo decisions, to walk backward through fate. The remnants entered a forest where each step became a question. What if Bramble had lived? What if Ririk had fled? What if Kalen had refused the ember? Trees twisted with regret. Time looped and lurched. Only Elian's dreamstone held them true. They emerged ragged but intact into a valley stitched from colorless threads. Light here had no direction, and sound moved sideways. In its center, a sphere of glyphs hovered, humming, the cradle. It recognized Kalen, flared bright, then dimmed. Too much has changed, Kalen said. We need to wake the old sigils. Elian approached the glyphs, eyes wide. They're asleep, not dead. One by one, he touched them. Truth. Mercy. Choice. Grief. Joy. Silence. The last sigil, sacrifice, flickered faintly. This one is cracked, he whispered. Kalen touched it and felt Bramble's name echo through his bones. As the cradle pulsed to life, so too did the mirror flame respond. From the north came its true form, not a being, but a force. It consumed the sky, replacing it with a second, burning reflection. It sent avatars, glass-skinned giants, mirror-eyed beasts, firelings that wore faces of the dead. The world began to bend. In the east, rivers flowed upward. In the west, mountains unraveled into threads. Kalen looked to the cradle and whispered, It's not rewriting reality. It's reflecting what we believe. Elian stared at his journal. Then we must believe something stronger. Together they carved a new sigil, not one born of the old world, but of all they had learned. It bore no word. Just a shape, interlocking hands, rooted beneath an eye, beneath a star. Elian placed it into the cradle, and for a moment, the valley bloomed. Colors returned. Birds sang. The reflection recoiled. But then the sky split with a cry of fury. The mirror flame descended, its body a storm of regret and perfection. You cannot remake what was broken, it intoned. You are not gods. Kalen stood, light flowing from his palms. We're not trying to be. We're trying to be real. The battle at the cradle was not one of steel or sorcery, but of story. The mirror flame cast illusions of perfection, Bramble alive, Kalen triumphant, Elian crowned. They were offered a world without pain, but they refused. Elian burned the false coronation with a page torn from his journal. Ririk shattered his illusion with a scream. Kalen faced a mirror of himself, older, crueler, and victorious. You could be more, it said. Kalen shattered it with one word. Enough. The cradle pulsed. Reality bent. And something broke. The mirror flame collapsed inward, shrieking not in defeat, but in understanding. You have made a new choice, it whispered, cracking apart. So must I. It did not die. It changed. Its pieces scattered into the sky like falling stars. The world stilled. Kalen collapsed, exhausted. Elian caught him. Is it over? He asked. Kalen looked up. No. But it's begun again. Right this time. The cradle whispered its approval, then sank into the soil. Not hidden, planted. As dawn broke across a sky free of reflections, the remnants watched new shoots rise from the earth, roots of future stories. Kalen stood beside Elian and Ririk, watching as the world breathed without chains. The sigils remained, not as weapons, but as reminders. Of choice. Of pain. Of love. And of truth. Elian opened his journal and began to write, not prophecy, but memory. There's one last thing to do, Kalen said quietly. Ririk looked to him. What's that? Kalen turned his gaze to the west, where an ancient, starless tower awaited. We go back to where it all began. The land was quiet now, but not in peace, only in the stunned hush that follows great change. Smoke curled from hills where mere fire once seared. Rivers flowed true again. The air tasted clean, almost too clean, as though the world had been scrubbed of a story half finished. Kalen walked alone ahead of the others, toward the obsidian ruin that loomed in the west, the starless tower, where the first ember had been lit, where he'd taken up the sigils, and where he had begun to forget who he was. It stood like a fossil of fear. This place still remembers me, he murmured. Ririk and Elian followed slowly, keeping their distance not from Kalen, but from the past. This place smells like regret, Ririk muttered, hand on his hilt. Elian nodded solemnly, his journal tucked to his chest. It is regret. The tower wasn't crumbling. It was frozen, a stillbirth of ambition. Glyphs of false glory flickered faintly along its base, half-spelled lies etched by those who believed power was purpose. Kalen reached the shattered archway, laid his palm against the stone, and whispered, I release you. The glyphs dimmed, and something deeper stirred. Inside, it was not dark, but hollow. No torches. No echoes. No welcome. The halls were lined with empty pedestals where the first 7 sigils had once been stored, displayed like trophies. Kalen remembered placing them here as a boy, marveling at their glow, not understanding their cost. Now, only dust remained. But deeper still, in the inner sanctum, a door waited, sealed since the dawn of the Order. Behind it, the source ember, unclaimed, untouched. Elian stepped forward. What happens if we destroy it? Ririk answered. What happens if we don't? Kalen opened the door with no key, only memory. The chamber inside was circular and silent. In its center, hovering inches above the floor, was a small, flickering flame, nothing like the mirror flame storm. This was modest, quiet, and heartbreakingly beautiful. The source ember pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat, slow and deep. Kalen stepped closer, and it pulsed faster. It remembers me. Elian nodded. It remembers everyone. It's been watching, waiting, offering. Ririk asked. Is it evil? Elian answered. No. But it's hungry. The ember spoke, not in words, but in offerings. It showed Kalen a world perfected, bramble alive, the order wise, the lands green, and Kalen himself, king of peace and flame. It showed Elian a realm without war, where dreamers ruled and no one was used. It showed Ririk a family returned, his betrayal never written. The flame offered, not forced. This is why it wins, Kalen said. Because it doesn't conquer. It tempts. He turned away, shaking. We can't kill it. It's not alive. It's a question. Elian stepped forward. Then we must answer it. Elian took his journal and began tearing pages, memories, choices, regrets, and tossed them into the ember. Each page burned not with fire, but with understanding. The flame flickered and dimmed. Ririk followed, tossing his father's dagger in. He would have wanted this, he whispered. Kalen took off his sigil-etched bracer and cast it into the light. You gave me power, he told the ember. But I'll take responsibility. The flame collapsed inward, like a breath drawn too long, and then it broke. Not with sound, but with release. From the shattered ember came not fire, but song. It filled the chamber, the tower, the sky above. A chorus of forgotten names, of untold stories, of futures unwritten. The sigils glowed faintly on the walls, no longer as weapons or tools, but as echoes. The tower shook. Dust fell. Roots cracked through the stone, breaking centuries of stillness. Elian fell to his knees, laughing and weeping. We did it, we answered. Kalen looked to the ceiling, where once a mural of conquest had been painted. Now, it was a night sky, full of stars. The tower collapsed gently, like an old man laying down. Not with violence, but with acceptance. Where it once stood, a meadow began to grow, strange, wild flowers sprouting between stone ribs. The survivors gathered, bone singers, whisper folk, the remnants of the remnant. They did not cheer. They planted things. Trees. Songs. Futures. Ririk stood atop a crumbled stair and declared, No more thrones. No more orders. Just people, choosing each other. Elian wrote it down. Kalen said nothing. He simply walked east, toward the edge of memory. He walked until the grass thinned and the soil turned black with ash. There, at the foot of the world, stood a tree that had never bloomed, a monument to what was lost. Kalen touched its bark and whispered a name. Bramble. Wind passed through the branches like a sigh. You never saw this, he said. But you were why we reached it. He placed Bramble's dagger at the roots. A single leaf unfurled, silver and green. Kalen turned away. For the first time since the ember chose him, he felt light. Elian stayed behind, becoming something not quite a king, not quite a prophet. He taught the children to draw their own sigils, not to bind the world, but to understand it. Every line is a question, he told them, and every answer is a choice. Ririk traveled the old roads, helping rebuild towns where only ruins remained. He no longer hid his face. The hero died, he would say, but the man learned to live. The world did not become perfect, but it began to grow. Years passed. Then decades. The ember never returned, not as flame, nor mirror, nor temptation. But sometimes, at twilight, people saw a flicker in the grass. Not dangerous. Not even magical. Just a reminder, choice remains. Kalen became a myth. Some said he vanished into the eastern sea. Others claimed he lived in the roots of the dreaming forest. Only Elian knew the truth. He never told it. Instead, he wrote another book, titled The Shattered Sigil. He wrote it not as history, but as warning. And so it ended, not with a crown, nor a war, but with a choice made, again and again, by those who remained. The land healed slowly. Songs returned. Pain remained, but no longer ruled. The ember had given them the truth, that stories do not end, they echo. And from those echoes, new tales begin. So when a girl with wild eyes and a scarred hand found a sigil carved into stone, she did not ask what it meant. She asked what she could make it mean. And thus, the story began again.